The Trump administration has started to draw up plans for a mission that would send U.S. troops and intel officers into Mexico to target drug cartels. That's according to two U.S. officials and two former senior U.S. officials familiar with this effort who spoke to NBC News. The plans would also involve drone strikes on drug labs in addition to boots on the ground. Officials say the covert operation would be kept secret, similar to recent strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats near Venezuela. Officials tell NBC that early training for the mission has started, but deployment is not imminent and discussions are ongoing. It comes as the Trump administration continues to ramp up strikes against boats allegedly carrying drugs at sea and threatens to broaden those attacks to land. New reporting from me and my next guest reveals that a Justice Department official told lawmakers that the administration does not believe it needs congressional approval to continue with such strikes. Typically, under the 1973 War Powers Resolution, the president needs approval from Congress for sustained military action longer than 60 days. We're at that point now. But according to a source familiar with that briefing, the DOJ's interpretation of the resolution is that it does not apply to this ongoing anti-cartel campaign. The Washington Post also reports that the administration doesn't think the strikes meet the definition of hostilities under the law because it doesn't believe U.S. troops are directly in harm's way. Want to bring in MSNBC senior national security reporter David Rohde. David, this is an opportunity where you and I get to take the phone calls and text messages that we exchanged yesterday as we were reporting this and sort of spill them out for the viewers, because we both agreed that we thought this was a really fascinating look at the way the administration could potentially be laying groundwork for something broader. So take us inside why the word hostilities is going to become such an important one as this story continues.
I'm sure, and thank you for having me here. It's this argument that essentially it's so safe for U.S. forces to carry out these drone strikes in that they're out at sea, it's a remotely operated drone, that American forces aren't actually in hostilities, and therefore they don't have to abide by a measure in the War Powers Act, which says that within 60 days of notifying Congress, hostilities need to end. That actually passed yesterday. Yesterday was the 60th day since the administration told Congress. So they're saying these strikes can sort of continue indefinitely. And on a broad sense, this is another example of President Trump vastly increasing the power of the presidency, essentially saying we don't have to notify Congress of this. There's been a debate about this in the past, but in major conflicts, the invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush, the invasion of Afghanistan, other presidents have gone to Congress for a resolution backing them. And what's interesting in the reports from NBC News that you mentioned, so yesterday, or for the drone strikes and at stuff at sea, that's just at sea, but there's also apparently plans for ground troops, and clearly those would put U.S. forces in danger on the ground in Mexico if that happened.
Yeah, I think once again, when you start hearing the administration begin to lay out its rationale in a legal sense to members of Congress who also are very intelligent on these matters, they start getting pressed on whether or not the word hostilities applies to, say, drone strikes, which in 1973, of course, a law is not going to be written to encompass those kinds of actions. That technology just didn't exist. But then when you start talking about what our NBC News colleagues are talking about, the idea that there could be ground invasions, that is the more typical kind of combat that the 1973 War Powers Act would apply to. So what should we be watching for in the coming days as we watch sort of both sides of this administration argument potentially begin to play out and the ramifications come after that?
You know the Hill best, but one other interesting thing was that on Friday, the senators who chair the Senate Armed Services Committee, Wicker and Reid, both said, the Republican and Democrat, they had sent multiple letters to the Pentagon about what armed forces are doing and have gotten no response. And then the other thing is, the administration's talking about pressuring the Maduro regime. There are, news reports of strikes on military bases in Venezuela. And that would be part of the strategy if they really want to try to counter the flow of drugs. But if an American, pilot flies into Venezuela and attacks a Venezuelan military base, they will come under fire from, surface-to-air missiles. So that's definitely hostility. So it's strange. It's just either a very narrow thing, if we're going to hit the boats, and if that happens, the trafficking occurs on land, or you engage on land, and then U.S. troops are definitely facing hostilities.
And I think that the administration, largely through Pete Hegseth, who has shared many of these videos of drone strikes at sea on these alleged drug cartel boats, he's largely been the person putting out this information. But do we have a sense, beyond targeting alleged cartels, of what the goal even is here? It feels a little open-ended and vague.
I think it's shifting. It's stopping fentanyl, but then there's pressure on Venezuela, and fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela; it comes from Mexico. And then it shifts to, hopefully pressuring the Venezuelan military that someone there will turn on President Maduro. He is an authoritarian leader. The opposition leader won the Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm not. That's a terrible regime for the Venezuelan people. But again, it's sort of shifting explanations and shifting goals.
And it's also the question of if the U.S. is once again trying to get in the business of doing regime change and the long, terrible history that this country has had with that. That's a different conversation for a different day. For now, we'll leave it there with MSNBC senior national security reporter David Rohde. Thank you, as always.
Thank you.